Somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right. We've got some difficult days ahead. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.
So right now we're going to bring in Mr. Eric Burse. Solomon, you could let go of Tony Smith's chat window. We can remove that one and the other EBONYCon one, if you don't mind. Mr. Burse, thank you so much for today.
Thank you. Can you hear me well?
We can hear you and see you perfectly. You're actually perfectly lit.
Great.
I want to say that I was very grateful and very thankful that you were able to pull together this amazing panel in very, very short notice. And it's so important to me because women and the women victims in this movement have not always been front and center as much as our male counterparts. So when I heard that we had Miss Teen America, Miss Teen USA of 2018, Miss Kentucky, Miss and of course, Dr. Ashley, we had all of these powerhouses coming together to lend Dr. Douglas Craddock. We had all the Miss Siddiqa. We had all these powerhouses coming together to raise awareness for Brianna Taylor. It's Yours is the Only panel that we extended to be 90 minutes today. We want to give you guys ample time and an ample platform. I know you're going to bring in some of these other ladies earlier, so I'm going to actually bow out and let you moderate this panel. But thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you. If I could, Brea and I have an introduction. If you could let Brea in, or
oh, sure. Solomon, can you help loop her in while we talk?
Thank you very much.
Okay.
And I will begin right when I see Brea on the screen. There she is. Hi, Brea. Good morning. Good afternoon. Can you hear me, Brea?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, I can hear you.
Hi.
Hi. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eric Burse.
And I am Brea Tilford. It is our pleasure to welcome you all to Louisville's edition of Ebony's Juneteenth Summit, which we're dedicating to our beautiful Black sister, Miss Brianna Taylor.
So Brea was Miss Kentucky USA 2018, and is from the same place that I am here in Louisville, Kentucky.
Yeah, over the past month or so, we've been in contact discussing like the events surrounding Brianna Taylor and really just wondering what's going on here in our hometown. So many people, young, old, Black, and white, we've all just been wanting like action and answers.
That's right. And so one of the efforts that Brea and I, and along with a group of other young professionals here, we have put together this panel to address some of the big questions that we're wondering. And you know, I have to say to Sabrina, we're so grateful and lucky to have Ebony partner with us to do this as we demand justice here in our hometown of Louisville, Kentucky.
Yeah, so many events have been happening in this case just as late as this morning. So our panel is going to break down everything for us. After the first panel, I'm going to lead us into a call of action with some very important people, some people that are near and dear to my heart. But first, let's introduce our panel.
Yes, and I just got a message from Miss Baker, Lanita Baker. She told me she'll be a few minutes late. I don't see her yet, but if the tech folks, if they see her on there, if you could pop her in, I'd appreciate it. So first, our first panelist is Miss Lanita Baker. She's an attorney here in Louisville and currently represents the Brianna Taylor family in their litigation against the city of Louisville and the police officers involved in Brianna's death.
And second, joining us is Miss Sadiqa Reynolds. She is a former judge, former top aide to Mayor Greg Fisher, and is currently the president of the Louisville Urban League. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Next is Reverend Timothy Finley Jr. I don't see him yet on the screen, but if the tech folks would pop him in, I'd appreciate it. Mr. Finley, Reverend Finley, is a pastor of Kingdom Fellowship Christian Life Center here in Louisville, and he and his parishioners have been leading local protests here. And unfortunately, about a week and a half ago, Mr. Finley was harassed and arrested by the police while protesting here on Shelbyville Road. So we're thankful that he's with us, and welcome, Mr. Finley.
Yes, and last but not least, we have Dr. Douglas Craddock, who is a professor and chief of staff at the University of Louisville's College of Education. Nice to see you, Dr. Craddock.
Pleasure to be here. I appreciate it.
So I know there's several people that weren't able to join our panel today, but I'm very excited for our discussion that we're going to have. So thank you, Brea, for helping me introduce these folks. And we will see you at the end of our hour for our call to action. So thanks so much, Brea.
Thank you.
Nice to see you, Brea.
Yes. So great seeing your face, Sadiqa. Hi, Dr. Craddock and Reverend Finley. I believe we're still waiting for Ms. Baker. She told me that she had to complete some interviews regarding the news that was shared this morning. But just to let our audience know, I think the news that was shared was that the city of Louisville has began to initiate their termination procedures for one of the officers involved in Brianna Taylor's shooting death. Is that correct, Sadiqa? Was that what you understand?
That is correct. Hankinson, the officer who, according to the letter of dismissal, shot into the home without understanding or knowing where the bullets were going to land, shooting through, curtains or blinds, endangering others, obviously, and then also previous violations of protocol. So he's being terminated, and it is directly related to this matter.
Okay. So thank you so much, Sadiqa, for telling us that. If you could, I told you on the phone this morning when we were chatting about this, that I've seen you on the front lines, it seems like, for the past definitely month or so, 2 months. I saw you at 26 and Broadway the morning after Mr. McAtee was shot and killed by Louisville Metro Police and the Kentucky National Guard. So Sadiqa, if you could, for our folks that are coming in from a national audience, can you kind of lay the groundwork, just kind of tell them what has happened here in Louisville? Because there's a few things. I think some people that I speak with think that they hear that, number one, the warrant that officers used that day to go in Miss Taylor's house didn't have her name on it, didn't have her address on it. And a lot of those things are incorrect. It was still all wrong, but some of the details folks are saying are wrong. So Sadiqa, would you lay the foundation for us?
Yeah, it's my understanding that the officer swore an affidavit, and it was one of several that they were going to execute simultaneously. Brianna's house was in fact the address on the warrant. It is the warrant that the judge signed. It contained her name, so there was no mistake about where they were going. The issue is whether or not the information in the affidavit was accurate. For example, there is an allegation in the there's sworn testimony in the affidavit that says that a gentleman who sold drugs was observed coming from Brianna's home with a package. We heard later from the postal inspector that and then they said they confirmed with the postal inspector that he was in fact receiving packages there. You heard from the postal inspector that was not the case. No one had confirmed with the postal inspector. There was another sworn testimony in the affidavit that Brianna's car was seen at another location where drugs were known to be sold. Doesn't give you a date, doesn't say how often. We don't know if that information was stale, if it was accurate, who saw it. A lot of information is missing. So the first place you have to start here is with the affidavit to determine even if the warrant is something that is a good warrant. Did they have any right to even be at her home? And then beyond that, they go to the home. I think everybody agrees that they knocked, because a battering ram certainly does count as a knock. The question is, did they announce? The answer is no to that. And how we confirm that is because Kenny Walker, who was the boyfriend of Brianna, who was there with her, had the opportunity to get his weapon. And when they came through the door, he shot one of the officers. And then in response to his firing, they shot into the home 22 times. 8 of those bullets landed in Brianna's body. And what I find most offensive, there are lots of things about the case that are offensive, but the thing that troubles me the most is that after hours and hours of making her mother wait, her mother first attempted to get to the apartment. They wouldn't allow her to get into the complex. She was told there were 2 ambulances that had left. One had taken an officer, one had taken someone else. And so she went to the hospital where she believed her daughter would be. She sat there for a couple of hours and waited. She was informed by the hospital that Brianna wasn't there. They had no idea, if she was coming, where she was, whatever. Mom then leaves. She goes back to the apartment complex. She's allowed to stand outside. And after hours of waiting, she has time to get coffee. It's cold, it's March. The detective, she asked, "Where is my daughter?" And she's told she's still upstairs. And at that point, or she's still in the apartment. And at that point, she knew that her daughter was dead. And after learning this information, the detective looks at her and says, "Did she have any enemies? Did Brianna or Kenny have any enemies?" As if LMPD doesn't know that they are the ones who just killed her child. So that's it in a nutshell. That obviously, I think we all know the bullets that were fired from the officers' weapons went into the bedroom of Brianna's sister. Had she been home, the mother Tamika might have lost 2 children that day. Several bullets into the room of the next door neighbors. So this is just a poorly executed no-knock warrant for sure. Now that in Louisville, the no-knock warrants have been banned. I don't know how much teeth there is in the legislation, but at least there's been a message sent: no more no-knocks.
Okay.
Oh, there's
okay. Hi, Miss Baker. Hi, we don't hear you just yet.
Yes.
There we go.
I was
Hi.
muted.
Thank you so much, Ms. Baker. I've let everybody know that you had just a momentary thing you had to finish up. We introduced you, and Miss Reynolds, Miss Sadiqa Reynolds, just kind of laid the foundation for this entire case, starting back with the detective who I guess applied for the search warrant for Miss Taylor's apartment. But we also did highlight, Ms. Baker, we highlighted that there was some information that came out today that the city was beginning today on June the 19th of 2020, beginning their termination of the officer, one of the officers. And so I know that you maybe were taking some interviews, but if you could give us your reaction to that. Surely it's not adequate, but please tell us your reaction.
It's definitely not the last step that we will be pushing for, but we have been calling for the termination of these officers. I know there's a process, so when they say beginning the process, we've been saying since day one, since we've called for the termination of the officers, that you have to give them notice. Yes, the chief has to notify the officer that they will begin termination proceedings. I don't expect that to be some long notice period. Of course, the date that I got was crossed out, but so that's proper processes, and we want them to follow the proper procedure. So we want the other officers involved terminating, including, the one that got the warrant under false pretenses, the other officers involved, and frankly, any other officers that this investigation determines has a role in Brianna's death. We might not know who they are right now, but if there are other officers out there, we will be calling for their termination as well. I do think that the termination letter to Brett Hankinson today, at least as it relates to Brett Hankinson, what I read in that letter is sufficient to begin criminal charges against Brett Hankinson as well. So we're gonna hope that comes from the AG soon, and we're gonna continue press. We're not gonna continue. We're gonna press for the AG to, at least as it relates to Brett Hankinson, start those proceedings, because that letter was what we've been saying since day one happened.
Thank you. Well, there's so many things I have questions about in what you just said, and we'll get to those during our hour. But I guess for folks that are not in Kentucky that are looking in on this, I think most of them possibly heard about this after there was a night of what some people would call violent protests in downtown Louisville, where maybe some shops had their windows busted out. I think some people were actually shot in the crowd, not sure by who. And that whole episode, it seems, was spurred because the mayor here, Greg Fisher, and his administration, his aides, they withheld the 911 call from Mr. Kenneth Walker for 2 months, which is hard to believe. It's hard to believe that the Commonwealth attorney, Tom Wine, who of course had access to all that, would have not heard it and would continue to prosecute Mr. Walker for attempted murder. But I want to ask Ms. Baker, I know you filed a lawsuit. What reason did you get for why they were not going to release that 911 call? So I think it was ultimately your litigation that got that release. Is that right?
Yeah, through our subpoena process. I honestly believe that this was going to be swept under the rug. If I didn't call on, Sam and myself, we've been representing Ms. Palmer since 4 days after Brianna was murdered. So we've been there since the beginning. We were trying to get people to pay attention. And finally, when we got to a point, it's like people just aren't paying attention. I called, my National Bar Association colleague and friend, Benjamin Crump, and said, hey, Ben, I need you. He has the experience. He does civil rights cases. He has a megaphone. I wanted attention to be paid to this case. And when he came in, he was able to bring the attention to this case. And it's that attention that we needed to make everyone else realize, hold up, this isn't as simple as they said on March 13th when they put out that LMPD officer was shot when they executed a search warrant, and that one suspect was dead, one suspect was in custody. That's exactly what they put out to the media. They called both Brianna and Kenny suspects. They didn't even know anything about Kenneth Walker. And that's how they fully intended this story to play out. We knew that was not the truth. When I met with the family and when I, just got to hear from them and them talking about Bree and all that, the amazing person that Bree was, I knew it wasn't right. And I knew I was going to fight for that family until the truth got out. And I'm going to continue to fight for them until the whole truth is out. And I'm going to continue to fight for them and our community until there is true reform within Louisville Metro Police Department. And I'm going to take care of home first because this is where I'm from. But the police reform has to be a national undertaking. So
I understand. Yeah, and so my next question is for both Ms. Reynolds and again for you, Ms. Baker. You're both attorneys. I recently became an attorney recently. In New York, I'm a public defender there. I think with some prosecutors, I could get a 911 call or any kind of piece of discovery, maybe 2 to 3 to 4 days after the incident happens. Is that your practice here as well, Ms. Baker and Ms. Reynolds, maybe in your former practice? Is that normal here? And why do you think it didn't happen here?
I was a prosecutor. I was a public defender too, both Sadiq and I. So we share that public defender fraternity with you. But I switched from defense to becoming a prosecutor, and I could request a 911 tape at 9 o'clock, and by the end of the day, I would have it in my email, the link to it in my email. So it's a quick process.
So why, I mean, the mayor here is a Democrat. His name is Greg Fisher. He was elected here maybe a few years ago. I think he has maybe 2 or so years left on his term. Why, Ms. Reynolds, I guess you also work for him, why would a Democratic mayor who won on the Black vote, why would he hide or withhold? Why would he do that?
Why do they do it anywhere in the country? Because we allow it. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And we've just got to deal with that. I mean, Greg Fisher's no exception, and Louisville is no exceptional city. We have our troubles, and it would have been nice if our mayor had responded more precisely and quickly. He didn't. Often Black communities are used. We elect Democrats all the time, and we elect whoever, and they show some loyalty. A lot of that is verbal, and I think sometimes get caught up in those things, and we don't push for the accountability that we need. And I think this was just the thing to light the fire. To Lanita's point, there were those of us who were asking questions of the police department about this case from the beginning, but we weren't doing it in conjunction with Tamika and with Lanita Baker. So, and it's just, you get into your silo of what you're doing. And our questions were, why didn't they have on, cameras? We don't understand. We thought in our community we were supposed to have cameras, and then you would get an answer, and then the question would be, well, why was it or not? What happened? Was there an announcement? Was there not? There are lots of different questions, and it really wasn't until the Washington Post story came out, I think, that you really learned of the contradictions. So it was like mom was over here working, and then people who were getting information about the case really couldn't access mom, didn't know that she was trying to get, attention, didn't know what was happening. And just like what Lanita said, you were, this picture that was painted was sort of this grand jury type picture of, police went to execute a search warrant on one of several locations where drugs were being either kept or sold. And when they went, the male suspect fired and shot the officer, and the female suspect was killed in it. And so that's sort of bland. And so you feel like you're sort of climbing uphill, and you realize that you're getting these not just lies, but these lies by omission too. So why would the mayor not act? I worked for the mayor. I got to tell you, and I have liked Greg Fisher. You don't work for somebody for 3 years and not. I have to be honest about that. And this has been one of the most challenging situations of my professional life, quite frankly, because I feel like I don't even know the person who is operating now. I am very disappointed, and I have said that. I have talked to him, and I've said, maybe we need to look each other in the eye. Maybe I am missing something, but I don't understand not getting rid of the officer. And even the letter today, there was nothing new. To Lanita's point, it's the information that we've always had. Why did it take PIU so long? What is happening in our police department? And you have to understand, we've had allegations of child sexual abuse. Our department has been riddled with challenges. So this is heartbreaking in a million ways.
Yeah, and thank you, Ms. Reynolds. I'm reading an article. I just did some brief research where you, of course, left the city to go to the Urban League. And I forgot to mention in your bio, you were the first African-American woman clerk to the Kentucky Supreme Court, which is awesome. But, I'm wondering, you left the city. Was there anything in your interactions with the mayor that would, tell you, okay, maybe he's not all the way down with Black people, or maybe he's just using them for votes or for photo ops or for anything like that?
I don't think he's just using people for votes. What I think it is that there is a level of privilege that some white people don't even understand that they have. And they think when they do certain things, it's almost as if, I do this and so you owe me something. Or so it's not even just this intentional using. Sometimes it is, let's just be honest. Sometimes it is just about a photo op, but sometimes it is, how people told Bill Clinton he was the first Black president. And so he started to believe. And so when Hillary got ready to run, people thought there was some sense of entitlement. I think that's what happens. And because we are such a forgiving people, such a loving people, and I'm sure Lanita would agree, prosecutors don't even want Black folks on juries, because even when the defendant is white, we want you to prove your case. Even where we have the opportunity to, let's imagine, get some revenge. Black folks want fairness. All we have ever wanted in this country was fairness and justice to be applied equally. So we're just a forgiving people, and we just continue to pull people in. David McAtee's mom invited the mayor to be with her for the funeral. She's an 80-year-old Black woman. We are conflicted because of our compassion, because we put out the thing that I think we desire the most, which is to be seen as a human being capable of making mistakes. So it's very hard for us to throw people away. And I am not different than any other Black woman. It's a difficult thing. But this case, this situation, what we have spent, what it has cost us emotionally,
the trauma of living in this city right now, the disregard for Black life, the lack of responsiveness, this is hard to take.
Yeah, I feel it. I know our other panelists, Mr. Craddock and Reverend Finley, feel it. And you said in your last answer to me, Ms. Reynolds, you said the magic word for me, prosecutor. And I'm thinking about the prosecutors who were involved in this case, the ones who charged Mr. Walker with attempted murder after or during their possession of that 911 call. So I know a lot of people in my research, if you can see my computer, I've got a list of people who I call bad actors. And I've got a lot of prosecutors' names on there. Commonwealth Attorney Tom Wine. How does, I know you're both former prosecutors. How?
No.
It was just me.
I
interned
at the prosecutor's office for a semester. And then
okay, all right. So Ms. Baker, I know this is a weird hypothetical, but how could Tom Wine prosecute Mr. Walker for attempted murder while having that in his own possession? And past that, did he commit a crime by doing so?
Here's the thing. Tom Wine didn't listen to that 911 tape. Tom Wine in his own press conference said that he hadn't even looked at this case prior to 10 days.
Do you believe that?
10 days before. I do, only because he doesn't present them directly to the grand jury. But I don't excuse him for it because he should have been involved because it was an officer-involved shooting. The issue that I do take issue with the fact that the grand jury presentation was less than 2 minutes long. And in that 2 minutes, they didn't explain that someone else was killed. They didn't mention Brianna at all in the 2-minute presentation.
As a former prosecutor, is that acceptable or is that wrong?
I'm saying I said it was wrong.
Okay.
Yeah, it's wrong. I'm not making excuses for it at all. So they never mentioned Brianna Taylor. They never mentioned anything about someone being killed during the execution. They only put in one portion of what Kenneth Walker said. They said he admitted to firing a shot at the officers. But what they didn't say is that he said he didn't know it was officers. That's wrong, right? Now, do I think that, so the whole issue is we need a better grand jury situation. We need to make the whole system, like is what they say, the system, him being indicted worked the way it was supposed to. It was a very one-sided presentation. Why do our laws allow for one-sided grand jury presentations, right? I'm not saying that a defendant necessarily gets up and testifies, but if you have a statement of the defendant that is very long and you're going to pull out parts of it, why not play the whole thing?
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important for people to know that as a defendant, you don't even have the option of going before the grand jury. They have to give you permission. Your attorney or you can request it, and then the prosecutor asks the grand jury if they'd like to hear from you, and then you have to wait. So that grand jury process is very one-sided.
Yes.
And how often do you know that they're going to present it? You don't know to say, oh, let me add, they did this quick, fast, and in a hurry. He didn't get to his probable cause hearing. They did it before his probable cause hearing. So,
yeah. Well, in New York, the defendant does have the right to testify. So I have to ask my clients, do you want to testify in the grand jury? It's ultimately the attorney's decision up there, but they do have the right up there. So we have to serve what's called cross notice to the prosecutor. But, getting past the grand jury and any of that information, what about Brady? Is the 911 call exculpatory information that they were withholding from the defendant?
There's a lot of stuff so you're not gonna have me justifying anything that the prosecutors did in this case.
All right. Well, I'm thinking.
If from day one of when this case went public, Kenneth is not even my client. Kenneth was never my client. Kenneth has one of the greatest defense attorneys in the city, but from day one, he was in capable hands. But from day one, I called for the charges against Kenneth Walker to be dismissed. Now, what I don't like is that when Tom Wine did his press conference, he said, we're going to dismiss this without prejudice, and we may be represented it at the end of the investigation. Mm-hmm. Let that man go. Let that man live. Let him be free, because he did what anybody in America would have done.
Right. I'm thinking about, where is the NRA? Where were they at standing up for Mr. Walker, defending his home with the firearm? They weren't they weren't here in Kentucky, at least, or in any of the news. But I do want to bring in Mr. Finley, because we're at the point now where the mayor or whoever, prosecutors, whoever, withheld that information for 2 months. Folks around the country are hearing Breonna Taylor's name. I'm hearing it, a month after she was killed. And then it's released. And then there's these, violent protests in the streets of Louisville, where I guess the national attention kind of came back into the city. So Mr. Finley, I saw that you were out protesting. You were arrested. It looked like thrown on the ground, handled very incorrectly, while peacefully protesting in the East End here, which is, for folks that are not from Louisville, it's more of the white area of town, as opposed to where Sadiqa is with the Urban League in the west part of town. So Mr. Finley, what made you, get your parishioners and yourself on the street that day or all those days?
Breonna Taylor. And as I've talked about this, I don't what happened to me in any way, shape, or form to take away from what the big picture here is, and it's about her. And even the little bit of attention that's come because of that, I want to use that attention and focus it right back on Ms. Reynolds and what Ms. Baker is talking about, because we are in a city with a police department that continues to display a consistent pattern of deception. And this is not the first time that this has happened. So even with what happened to me, that is what it is, and that's being handled as well. But we were out there because of Brianna. We were out today at the FOP because of Brianna. And as I said on the news, I have no shortage of time and creativity in showing up in places peacefully, because I know the media likes to make all protests look violent and out of control, and that's just not the case. But all of this is because we recognize as a family, as a city, what happened to her and what happened to Kenneth was unjust. And we're going to continue to push and back up Ms. Baker and everyone else. And to be honest, I don't even have to really talk during this because we're getting educated by two of the best. So I feel bad for even taking away from, I'm getting educated.
Well, Mr.
No,
Finley,
we want
of
to hear
course,
from you.
yeah, we do want to hear from you because you, what happened to you, the police, manhandling you, throwing you on the ground, arresting you while peacefully protesting, I think is evident of a larger problem in our community here in Louisville, which Sadiqa has alluded to with the mayor and maybe his relationships with the African-American community. None of it's acceptable, So Mr. Finley, what are you telling the young folks in your church who say, we've had Barack Obama, Mayor Fisher came to all of our cookouts in the West End. He comes up, takes pictures and shakes our hand, but now we feel majorly oppressed. What are you telling them? I'm sure it's hard.
Well, not just the young people in my church, but really the young people in the city. They have those questions. But my advice, my strategy is to really take a look at not just the mayor, but to look at what are the institutions, what are the organizations, who are the people that we should be shining the light on. I mentioned them before. We've talked about LMPD, we've talked about the mayor, but where I have really, really concentrated my attention is on the Fraternal Order of Police, because unfortunately, and I didn't know this, but I wrote an open letter to the former president of the FOP. I believe it was 6 years today. It came up in my Facebook memories for comments that he made during another unfortunate situations. So we have a pattern that we're seeing from a union that constantly works as obstructionist. And I know it's very hard to, disband a union or to try, we're not trying to do all of that, but really to call more accountability, more diversity. And when politicians and others come to our churches, as they usually do during election time, there be some real conversation about what we want to hear and what kind of accountability needs to be in place, who's accepting money from who, and really teaching young people that there are various ways in which you can protest. Being out on the street and marching is one way, but there are several different ways that we have to be engaged.
Mm-hmm. And I know one way you are probably taking action and you're protesting. I believe that I saw you were appointed to a police or justice oversight board for the state. Is that correct?
Well, I was on the transition team. The new board, I'm not on that one because
Okay.
at the time, I was working for the city. In light of all of this, I have helped me stepped away, resigned.
Yes.
Yeah, in light of all of this, so I'm not on that particular board, but I am able to work with various individuals in the city and the state to try and bring about change.
Yeah, well, I'm going to touch on some of those specific ways that, I've maybe identified that we could work on towards the end of our hour in the lead up to Brea's call to action. But thank you for sharing that with us. And I just wanted to bring in also Dr. Craddock. He is chief of staff and a professor at the University of Louisville School of Education. Typically a profession, I guess, that women would be a majority in, but Mr. Craddock, of course, is there. And we wanted one of our major themes of this panel today to be about gender. Why, over the last 2 or 3 months have we had these incidents with police across the country? And it seems like the next day we have action, at least in Atlanta. Sorry about that. At least in Atlanta with the mayor there and the police chief. And also yesterday, the prosecutor there charging one of the officers with a pretty large murder felony, I believe. We did have some other females that were supposed to be on our panel, but some of them had to back out. It's okay. But Dr. Craddock, can you speak to that a little bit about, what are we seeing in terms of females not getting as much attention or media attention or action than males?
Yeah, so thank you again. And then it's an honor to be on a panel with Ms. Baker, Ms. Reynolds, as well as you, Reverend Finley. Really happy to be here. When you begin to think about Black women in general, and when you think about the victimization of Black women across the board, there isn't a sensationalizing behind them, as in the media doesn't honor Black women the way they should. And if you look at it from a research perspective or a data perspective, Black women are brutalized by the police just as much as Black men in certain references. So when you begin to think about that and analyze it, the value of the Black woman isn't where it should be. And the reason behind that, we know can be several reasons when you think about the body of a Black woman and how over time, the way we've looked at it and the way Black women, their bodies have been just brutalized across the board. I think when you play that into the media, you're not going to get enough stories. And the reason behind that, the ratings may not be there, the understanding of a Black woman may be there. But I think in the Black community itself, we understand, or we should, the value of a Black woman and how we should continue to raise them up. And I think that's important to this hour that we have right here, is that people really need to say her name and understand what saying her name means. And I think from March to April, even people in the city of Louisville didn't even realize what had occurred due to the various reasons that Ms. Reynolds and Ms. Baker have already said. So I think even in our city, we still need to understand that day by day, our Black women need to be protected more. And the ways in which we do that is change happens inside. So within our houses, within our communities, we need to make sure that we're having the conversations and the dialogue that support the notion of Black women and the importance of them in our families. So you think about, go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to ask Ms. Reynolds, as a trailblazing, attorney who happens to be a woman, how do you process this? What are you thinking?
Oh, I think it's so simple. I think that Black women have often chosen Black men and boys even over ourselves. Quite frankly, if you go all the way back to slavery, you have stories of the master knocking at the door and the woman choosing to send the daughter to the door because she would only be raped, but if she sent the son, he might be killed. And so we have constantly been willing to sacrifice ourselves and at great cost to us. And I think the theme has really been about Black boys and Black men and what is happening to our men. And there are horrible things happening to our men. There are horrible things happening to all of us. And I think that should always have been the story, that we are all suffering in this society from structural racism and bias and all of the harm that has been done. We really owe it to ourselves to fully tell the story of our pain and to recognize that pain hits our bodies differently maybe, but certainly equally. I think though what happens is when you start looking at pay rate and you see, you know, women who, you know, the higher graduation rates now from college and things like that. And so I think what happens is sometimes our pain and the things that we suffer kind of get pushed down. And so I think this is really a time, and looking at Brianna's case, you know, we're talking about justice for Bree, and you think about Sandra Bland, how much we said, how much we didn't say. And so I think we are all seeing now, we don't have the option anymore of silence. We have to stand with each other. And that is not to say that we have been against each other, because I don't think that we have been. I think for some reason though, that I'll just tell you, even if you work in a jail, girls don't even get the same number of visits as a boy. So, you know, it's the women, it's the girls who do the visiting. So in every way, things are off balance, and we have to call that out. We have to talk about it. And I don't think that it is an intentional thing that we are doing, but it is a thing that is happening, and we have to make sure that we highlight it.
Yeah,
and I appreciate the question.
Yeah, and I agree with Ms. Reynolds. When you just begin to think about the Black woman, how she constantly pushes up the Black man for the betterment of them rather than her. You think about our Black mothers. I think that's something that psychologically has been impressed upon us. And I think that's something that we have to continue to recognize, and there has to be some change around that. Because I think as we do that, and that respectability of the Black woman continues to be raised, then situations like this won't take 3 to 4 months for the community to come in and come out and protest and do various things. They'll do it on day 1 and day 2 from the beginning of it all.
Yeah, thank you. I'm thinking next about, you know, the folks that were, you know, active in withholding or covering up this information for none of us to see or to largely pay attention to for almost 2 months. I'm thinking, Ms. Baker, do you think that because Brianna was an African-American woman, that the powers that be thought that'll make it easier for us to sweep it under the rug?
I think there's a number of things that made them think. So I don't think it's just the African-American woman. We know traditionally the African-American women that are murdered or, you know, while in police custody typically don't get the same traction as when our males are. One thing I do always think too is there's no body camera here. And with George Floyd, we were able to see how horrendous that murder was, how callous the officers were. We saw it with our own eyes. With Breonna Taylor, it's us having to tell this story over and over and letting people hear the being that Brianna was, hearing from her mom, hearing from her sister, from her aunts, from us getting the information. You know, it was a fight for us to get information to put in front of people. So we're having to tell people. And then you have a lot of people, as they should, well, I won't say as they should, we have a lot of people that give that benefit to the officers. So they don't want to believe that this was as bad as we're making it out to be, right? But it's just as more information started to come out and you get the more information and you start using your own common sense to put together the pieces, you see that we're telling the truth here. And so then you have to, it's waking more people up to, okay, we can't believe everything that comes out that the officers say. It's not always there. So I say all of that to say the bigger issue is we need not only for police departments to give all of the officers body cameras, not enough for them to give it to them. We damn near need to make it a crime for them to not activate it when they're those cameras when they're interacting with individuals. I think that body cameras are a huge step to making everyone more honest as it deals with police interactions. It's to protect the officers, it's to protect the civilians. It needs to be a crime for them to not turn those cameras on.
Yeah, and for the folks,
and have them in the right place.
Right.
Yeah, so that you can see, because we have seen those
you can actually see.
Yeah.
Well, it was something too that I caught yesterday, even with the comments from the AG, that I thought were just interesting. And again, I don't know, you all would know more than I know on this. But he had said that he was getting information incrementally, that incrementally information was coming. And the mayor has told us from day one, or whenever this started, that all the information was turned on, that all the information has been given. And right there on the television with the entire state and the world watching, it just demonstrated, to Ms. Baker's point, that there's a whole lot of, there's a lot of deception going on, and it makes it hard
I would
to
call them
trust
lies.
anybody.
I would call them lies. Yeah.
And I'm
it
going
just
to
makes it hard.
say, I will tell you, we're not convinced that there's not body camera footage from that night. We're still trying to get it, but we're not convinced that there wasn't. So.
Oh Lord.
Yeah. Well, for the folks that are tuning in from outside of the state and outside of the city, days after the what some people would call violent protests occurred, the Kentucky National Guard and the Louisville Metro Police were summoned to control the protests, and that resulted in a Black male business owner in West Louisville being shot and killed by the Kentucky National Guard, who was supposed to be in the city to, watch the protests. And on that morning after that, the governor of the state got on TV and said, I want them to release the body camera. It's going to show what the officers were feeling during this moment. It's going to show what they saw. It's going to show what other people were doing around them. And so we waited 8 more hours, and at 5:00 p.m., the mayor of Louisville, along with people who report directly to him, came on TV and said, there is no body camera at all. And I think I probably counted maybe 15 or 20 officers or National Guard members who responded that night. So I cannot personally, as Eric Burst sitting here, I can't believe that there would be no body camera. So I put that, Mr. Finley, in another category of a lie, in my opinion. And Sadiqa, I talked to you this morning. It seemed like on my computer, there's also a list here of bad actions that go along with the bad actors on this side. Mayor Fisher has a lot of bad actions on that list. What, are you ready to call for him to resign, or what will it take? How many more lies from the mayor?
Well, I hear you. And let me tell you, it has been a real struggle. There are definitely people who are calling for the mayor's head, calling for him to resign. I am a strategic woman. If I call for something, I expect it to get done, and I want to understand who's up next. I am very disappointed in what is happening in my city, and the mayor is either lying or someone is lying to him, because he has certainly shared bad information. And the example of Daniel Cameron today is just one more, or yesterday rather, because it was my understanding, and I, along with other people in this community, heard that the PIU investigation had been completed and had been turned over. And that is not what we heard from our Attorney General yesterday. And there have been other things that have been said. So for us at the Urban League, we have not yet joined in any chorus of calling for the mayor's resignation, because again, I don't call for anything that I don't mean business about. And there is a strategy to every move. There are always intended and unintended consequences. And I think that what Black people have sometimes failed to do is to be as strategic as those we are dealing with. And so what we want right now is justice for Brianna. What we want right now is to make sure that we get real police reform. What we want right now is a focus on the things in our community that need to be changed. Those people who have been suffering, who have been over-policed, who have been impacted by redlining, who are living in a community with 60% of the vacant and abandoned properties in our city, who are overly represented in those essential service jobs. We really need justice that is widely cast, and it's in every area: jobs, education, health, housing, all of those things. And so we need to build on the momentum that is there, and continue to push forward. So where we are today as it relates to the mayor does not necessarily represent where we will be tomorrow. And I want to be clear about that. There are no forever anything as it relates to politics or this case. I am a Black woman, and this is, again, one of the most difficult cases of my professional life. I mean, just the way the police presented it, even to me, I mean, there was just such dishonesty, and there continues to be dishonesty and a lack of not even just a lack of remorse, but a lack of acknowledgement, no apology. The mayor has certainly apologized, I think, on more than one occasion. But to your point, to Reverend Finley's point about the FOP, I understand that unions are there to negotiate packages and benefits and to stand by the officers, but I always imagined that they would stand by the good officers, and the bad ones they would want to be rid of, because the bad ones put us at risk and put the good officers at risk. And I have been out there and seen the protesting, and in large part in our community, people have been peaceful. And apology. The mayor has certainly apologized. I think on one point to
I think they fixed that, sorry.
That's okay. But so there have been a lot of peaceful protests, and some of them have gone terribly wrong, absolutely. But I think that when you look in the eyes of those officers, again, I am a Black woman, I see pain, I know pain when I see it, I've lived with it every day in some regard in parts of my life. And so I look at some of those officers, and they're young and they're trying and they're scared. And I'm thinking, he's got to fire these officers. We've got to be able to move past this. If people are going to fight to get their jobs back, let them fight. Justice, you know, they have the right to due process. But we can't go on like this as a city. We don't deserve it. And it's just been too much for too long.
And I want to add just back to the beginning of what Sadiqa was talking about, and asking about Mayor Fisher resigning. That's one of the things is we do have to be more strategic, because for everyone that's asking and calling on his resignation, I hope they know what that means, or that they've taken the time to know what that means. I, for one, and I ain't gonna call no names out, we don't want the person that would become the mayor if he does resign. So we have to be careful when we call out demands without knowing what the consequences of those demands are. It's not going to be David James, if that's what people are thinking. I know some people think that it would be the Metro Council president that steps into those roles. That's not. So,
Ms. Baker, who would it be, just so the audience knows?
It's the deputy mayor.
Okay.
Which is not elected. It's no one that the people has chosen. So, you know.
Thank you. Well, one other thing that concerned me, we had the Attorney General give us an update yesterday, a few days after, you know, Beyonce and Jennifer Lawrence were sending him messages and telling him to please take some action. But 2 Mondays ago now, Mr. Cameron flew from Kentucky to Washington, D.C. to participate in a Donald Trump and police unions event, while it seemed like simultaneously serving as the special prosecutor in this case. Did that trouble you at all, Ms. Baker? Because no reporters, I don't think, asked him that question yesterday.
Not necessarily. I'm not gonna get, did I like seeing him up there? No, but did it concern me? No. Because, you know, he's but one party that's doing an investigation right now. We also have the FBI and the Department of Justice that's involved. I know that this is a top priority there. So I will say that, you know, while I don't know that it'll come as quick as we want it, I do think that we will get justice for Bree at the end of all of this. Then we have to continue to push for it. So when I say that, I don't want people to stop what they're doing. I want that pressure to that pressure to stay there.
Okay.
But yeah.
Brea is going to come back in, and we're going to transition to our call to action. But just with this group, I wanted to spend, you know, the next 5 minutes hearing your suggestions. I have a few. In New York, where I practice as a public defender, they repealed a law called 50A, which sort of masks or seals police misconduct records. So if I'm going to trial with someone, I wouldn't be entitled to see any of these records because they would just be sealed, or any of the disciplinary measures taken after that. And that was repealed, I think, just this last week by the legislature up there. And while I've had a little bit of time in between some of my cases, I've been able to flip through the collective bargaining agreement that the Metro Council government has here with the police union. And I think there's some bad stuff in there like that. So I just wanted to, you know, those might be two things that we could, you know, as a collective, we could look at changing. Like I'm looking at an article here from Brooklyn where Mayor de Blasio is going to set up a public online database that will let New Yorkers track police disciplinary cases. That might be an idea for Louisville. One other thing is I'm not having confirmed this. I'm not sure if it's real or not, but this is floating around on social media. This is the picture of the Louisville Police Public Integrity Unit, or maybe a prior group of them. That looks like all white males, which is concerning to me if that's the group that would be in charge of investigations for the police department. So maybe, some large scale changes like that. But I'll start with Ms. Baker. And if we could just go around and end with Brea, tell us, what are your suggestions to make sure this never happens to anyone, not my nephew or not anybody's child ever again?
I think one step was Brianna's law banning no-knock warrants, requiring the use that body cameras not only be worn, but activated and having significant penalties if they're not. The independent investigations. And when I say independent investigations, LMPD or no police department around the country should be investigating their own individuals. And especially not as it relates to, here it's a promotion system, right? So you have people that are in PIU that have worked side by side with the people that they're investigating. How does that work? What is a houseway? So that needs to change. We need outside independent investigations. We need prosecutorial bodies that are not also relying on that same department to get convictions against civilians. So we're going to be prosecuting the police. It needs to be a different prosecuting agency. And there's so much we need. But I'll let everyone else chime in, but those are things right off the bat that scream out to me.
Just one thing I wanted to clarify, Ms. Baker. Thank you for that. Of course, I applauded everybody that worked with the Brianna's law, and I think Ms. Keturah Huron was supposed to be on our call. I think she also spoke at the Metro Council about that. So major achievement. I did read a few days ago about something called a quick knock warrant. Is that?
Well, then, yeah. If you notice, we covered that in Brianna's law because we didn't want because what happens is knock and announce. They knock and announce, but they are banging on the door at the same time. So the ordinance that we have, and that was specifically at our push, and we had an expert that we engaged to work on that law. And he said, so in our language, we have that they have to wait at least 15 seconds before they try to force entry. So you can't be knocking and announcing, banging at the same time and say, oh, we knocked and announced. The Supreme Court says nothing less than 10 seconds. So is reasonable. We have more time than what the Supreme Court asked for. So we knew about quick knock, quick whatever, quick entries, and we wanted to close that loophole. And that's one of the things when we're drafting legislation, we have to make sure that we are looking at it holistically and addressing any little loopholes like that. Because they know how to, that's what they train to do, is how can we get around this?
Absolutely. Yeah, Mr. Reverend Finley.
I would say with the policy that has already, I saw yesterday where they talked about officers stepping in when other officers violate and things of that nature. But I would say, I think the LMPD should publicly disclose its procedures when officers violate protocols. I think that's one, and then ending that blue code of silence. I don't know how you turn that into a policy. I'm sure there's a way, but I think there is a lack of accountability within LMPD right now to where you can witness someone do something that they shouldn't do, and it stays within the ranks. And I think that is extremely important. And then one more that I actually got this from the Urban League when they put out their demands, which I thought was brilliant. But I would love to see a Black officers union. I think that's something that could be very, very beneficial and impactful in our city. I would say that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Ms. Reynolds. Yeah.
Well, of the 1,168 officers, now 67 officers employed by the Louisville Metro Police Department, only 122 of them are Black. So we definitely need to think about how we recruit. We have to think about who gets through the screening, how you get promoted, all of those things. Obviously, I agree with everything that's been said, especially the Black Officers Association. We have to have those Black officers have to have support. I happen to know that they have been complaining for quite some time about how they've been feeling. They haven't had the responsiveness. In some cases, they have come to the league and they've gone to other people. We have tried to take their grievances back. And then I think they've even had an opportunity to meet with leadership and still seen no response. I think FOP should be representing good officers and should be called out when the bad ones are there. I think we have to do a better job at recruiting chiefs of police who really do believe in community policing. You have to have some relationships. I definitely believe in divesting funding from the police department and reinvesting it in other things. There's no reason for an armed police officer to show up for someone who is unarmed and maybe has a mental illness or other, things. I can think of a million other situations where police are just not the best equipped. And so how do we then fund social workers or others who would be the first responders? We have released, today we'll release a document signed by 50 organizations, I think, calling for some police reform and other reforms as well. We point out in that document that nurses all the time deal with belligerent patients and they don't have to use lethal force. I'm sure it's not the best part of their jobs, but clearly officers are not trained to do that. There are so many things, the over-policing of our communities. We have to talk about all of these things. We have to continuously push. And this is the important thing for me and for all of us, I think. It is imperative that we focus on the policy change, not just programs. Training is good, but if I cannot change your heart, I will change your behavior, and I will do that by holding you accountable. And I think what happened in this country all of a sudden is between Ahmaud Arbery, and of course that had nothing to do with police. Oh, yes, it did, because they didn't really investigate it, because if there were never that release of that video, we would not have known. But if you start there, and then you have Brianna and you have George Floyd and you add David McAtee, it has just been too much for us. It has been too much even for white Americans who thought that we were being harmed because we were resisting arrest. It was just overwhelming to see that man with that knee in his neck and that officer with his hands in his pockets, like not even threatened enough to think that he might fall over. So we have to talk about real reform, and we should not, please, let's not limit this to police reform and criminal justice reform. This has to be bigger than that. This is about poverty in pockets of our community and people suffering in ways that are just not appropriate. That please keep this as a bigger conversation. This is not just about police.
Dr. Craddock.
Just in total agreement with everything that's already been said. I think representation is important, openness is important, and transparency is key. And I think in addition to that, with the policy side, as we know, we're voting in Kentucky right now. So we need to make sure that we're getting to the polls as much as we can and really put people in place that can help with that policy across the board.
Well, thank you all. I want to give the last word of this panel to Ms. Baker. And I know Brea is on. Good to see you again, Brea. Brea and I and our group, we had been, so frustrated by all of this going on, wanting to, march right out of our house onto the street. We had begun to plan a march on Frankfurt. And as all of you know, Dr. King, along with Jackie Robinson, marched on Frankfurt in March of 1964, demanding an end to segregation in public accommodations, I believe. And so we thought it was the perfect time to return to Frankfurt as a group to lead a march on the state capitol, given all of what I would call lies and cover-ups and deception that I feel like I've witnessed in this case. I know everyone has a different opinion. But, and we learned that Ms. Baker, the family is also wanting to plan a march. So we have paused ours, and I think you can tell us about the plans for the march next week.
Yes, the family, along with Tamika Mallory with Until Freedom, and once I learned about your efforts, I reached out to you all, and with D'Angelo Russell and his team, right? So next Thursday, the 25th at 11 a.m., we will be having a rally at the Capitol it is, it's going to be some heavy hitters there. So come out, support. You know, that's where Daniel Cameron is. Like I said, when we started, I think the letter said it gave him plenty to go ahead and charge Brett Hankinson with. But we're going to let everyone know that just because we're getting these nuggets, we're not done yet. We're not letting up yet. So let's rally in Frankfurt. So.
Well, thank you so much. Our panel is concluded, so we all can end. And I believe, Brea, you are going to introduce our next group. Thank you all.
Charles Booker.
Yes. Oh.
Thank you, Reverend.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks.
You've done a phenomenal job, all of you. I'm with Reverend Finley. I've learned so much today. And our reason for this last portion of the panel is piggybacking off of some of the things that you all said, that it's cumulative, right? There's so much work to be done. And I think that everyone has a lane to contribute to the greater conversation at hand. And I think that myself, as a previous title holder and ambassador of the state, along with some of my sister queens and other Black women who are doing amazing things, both in and beyond their communities, to contribute to change, to amplify Black female voices, to share our stories. This is actually a full circle moment for me. I created a platform, Grow, Lead, Inspire, when I was a college student, for next generation girls to effortlessly provide them resources and mentors to effortlessly walk into their own purpose and calling, so that they too can contribute to change in the world. I was inspired to do so while interning at Ebony as a college student in New York City in their style and beauty department. And I was just so moved by going into an office every single day, seeing young, fresh Black female faces who are just killing it in their careers, who are intelligent, and everything that oftentimes in Kentucky you don't typically see. And so I wanted to create that space here in Kentucky. And that's my part. Aside from protesting isn't for everyone. I've been doing it, but I know some people just aren't comfortable, especially considering the pandemic. But I thought it'd be great to bring Haley, who is Miss Haley Coburn, who is Miss Teen USA 2018. She's also a student at Princeton, and she is working on some amazing projects to highlight and share her story and some of the racism that she experienced as Miss Teen USA. Dr. Ashley Anderson, who is now the executive director of Miss Kentucky America. She's also has her own health and wellness practice here in Louisville. And I think she can really contribute to the conversation, because now more than ever, we realize as Black people how important it is for us to take care of ourselves. Every single day, there's so much more news that's being thrown at us. And everywhere we turn, like, people are talking about what's happening in America regarding Black people. And sometimes it's okay. We need to know it's okay to take a step back and really take care of ourselves, so that we can show up as the best versions of ourselves for ourselves and our community at large. And lastly, but not least, we have Cordelia Cranshaw, who she just got married. So congratulations, Cordelia. During the pandemic, very courageous and amazing thing that you did to do that during the pandemic. But she too is doing some amazing work with youth in the DC area, and she has an incredible story herself. But so I do want to, is Ashley in here? We have Ashley. I see Haley.
Brea, are you Jorian's little sister?
I am.
Okay.
Small world. But...
Small world.
Oh, I see you, Cordelia. Hi, Cordelia.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Hi, Haley.
Hello.
Hey, Haley.
Hey. It's a reunion.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. I will go ahead and move on to Haley until we can get Ashley in here. But Haley, if you don't mind going ahead and sharing what you're doing as it relates to your documentary that I've just recently learned about, and just how people can as it relates to beauty standards, because I know that's a lot of the backlash that you received was in regards to that. What you're doing and how you encourage other people to kind of create change in that space as well.
Yeah, so just a little backstory. When I was 17 years old, I won the Miss Teen USA competition, and it was an amazing moment. It still is one of the best days of my life. But shortly after, I learned that there were some crude and malicious comments made about my win. There were comments about my body. There were comments that I was a diversity pick. There were even comments that said that I only won because I was set to go to Princeton, and claims that it was only because of affirmative action. So, you know, being 17 at the time, I was very impressionable. I was a freshman at my first year in college. So this response made me very emotional and broke my heart almost. But I was really grateful for Princeton, specifically the African American Studies department, because for the first time in my life, I was able to study these issues and really develop the vocabulary to talk about and understand some of the things that I experienced growing up and that year specifically. So, you know, throughout history, America, we all know, has a very fraught history, and there has been the continual devaluation of Black features, and consequently, our beauty standards are centered around these white European features. And there are steps that we can take day by day to really help dismantle this. And the first and arguably most important is education, you know, just understanding how it got to be this way, and telling our children about it in schools, in the household, because a lot of the time, unfortunately, Black history isn't discussed in schools, as I'm sure we all know. So we can also call out microaggressions, things that are said about Black people and Black features. And it's really important to change the narrative and really acknowledge what we know is true, which is that Black features and Black people are beautiful and amazing. So one thing I learned with my experience in pageantry is that one industry that has a huge responsibility and really needs to be a leader in changing the narrative is the entertainment industry. And this is done, you know, we can call for large companies to finally cast Black people with Black features as protagonist roles. Even writers, like of children's books or young adult fiction, can write about protagonists that are Black people, so that children reading it, or even young adults reading it, can see themselves in these characters and identify with that. Because I know growing up, that's something that I always yearned for but struggled to find. And one thing that's happening at an extreme rate right now that's really amazing to see is people just amplifying Black voices and resharing Black narratives on social media, which is something that takes such little effort to do. So I'm really excited to see that happening, and it's something that we can continue to do and not just make it a trend, but make it something that's continual. So as Brea mentioned, one thing that I'm personally working on that I'm very excited about is a documentary about pageant women that have won Miss America, Miss Universe, Miss Teen USA like myself, or Miss USA, because representation is increasing in pageantry, but the standard is still centered around this Eurocentric idea of what beauty looks like. And a lot of the time when women of color win, there is a backlash similar to my own, or comments that are made and experiences that they face throughout their year. So I'm going to interview all of these women and give them this platform to really discuss kind of the more negative side of some things that they experienced during their reign. So I'll be working on that for the next year, and I'm really excited to just shine the light on dismantling the racialization of beauty standards, and, you know, just stating what we all know, which is that Black bodies, Black features, and Black people are really beautiful, and it's time for this country and the world to see it that way.
Absolutely. So anyone that has ever questioned you know, Haley's reign, you are so phenomenal. And, you know, you and I have had side conversations prior to your actual crowning. And I've always just, the moment that I saw you, the moment that, you know, our photos and things were being posted for class of 2018, I was just so excited to just hug you and tell you how proud and happy I was for you to be a sister queen, and you are more than deserving. You know, you are one of the most intelligent young women that I know. So keep doing what you're doing. I also think it's interesting something you said about the African American Studies department at your school was kind of one of the first times that you were able to dive deep into our history. And I too had a very similar experience. Do you feel that if it wasn't for that department at your university, do you feel that you would be as aware of, your history as a Black woman, especially at, a predominantly white institution?
Yeah, without a doubt, the African American Studies department is the first time I learned why everything was happening. Like growing up, I did classical ballet, and ballet is another industry that is full of systemic racism and microaggressions. So it was really interesting to learn about our history and our culture, and to think back in my life when this person made this comment about my body or my hair, like there's a history behind that, and there's a reason that they're saying that. So without a doubt, I'm so grateful for that department. And it is kind of disheartening to know that like Black history is only taught in these really segmented areas that people kind of have to seek out, when, like Black history is American history. It's not its own segmented narrative. And that's something that America needs to work on as well, which is incorporating our history into this history, because, Black people built this country. So I'm grateful for the department, but I think that the school and our education system in general has a lot of work to do.
Yes, absolutely. So I think that's a call to action in itself. Anyone that has the opportunity to embark upon a journey in higher education to find out if here it's called the Pan-African Studies Department at the University of Louisville, which is an amazing department. So I encourage anyone that attends U of L to at least take one course. It's sad, but we have to take the initiative of our own to find out our history. So read as many books. I know that a lot of our white allies have been sharing information, how they too can educate themselves, but it's important for us to do that work too. So thank you so much, Haley. I see that we have Dr. Ashley Anderson on here now. Hi, Ashley.
Hi, darling, how are you?
Good to see you. I did want you to just really kind of tap into how important and what call to action you have about taking care of self, our health and wellness right now, because I was just saying yesterday, I feel emotionally overwhelmed. I can't get sleep. And when I am sleeping, I'm dreaming about the news that I've heard, over the past couple of weeks. So what recommendations do you have for us as women and just as Black people in general right now?
Yeah, Brea, what you said is what I'm seeing every day. And I want to even start by saying, like, obviously I'm coming to this panel as a Black woman who sleeps in her bed in a locked, behind a locked door every night thinking that I'm safe. Obviously we know now that's not always the case, but I'm also coming as the wife of a Black man and the mother of 2 Black boys. And as a healthcare provider, those things really have come full circle now, because like you mentioned, I care for women day in and day out. And the last month especially has been heart-wrenching, because I have women who are disgusted and devastated and crying, and they are reconsidering childbearing at all because they just can't bear the idea of their child's name as the next hashtag calling for justice. There's just so much, and I really worry about the psyche and mental health of our people, because when we're being honest about the realness of what's going on right now, and we are being murdered and lynched in plain sight in the wake of a pandemic where people are already devastated and stressed and desperate for change, it's a scary space for us to be in. And something my therapist always says is you can't be the slow steaming volcano, because any little thing will make you break. Any little thing will cause that explosion that we don't need and can't afford right now. So while there is significant work to be done, obviously there are little steps made today. We have tremendous amount of justice to wait for and continue to fight for. But we have to be very purposeful about finding avenues for release. So my call to action truly is to look for those moments and be purposeful about creating those moments of reprieve, to find those spaces where you can be grounded and start your day off with something not on social media. You know, I think it's okay to unplug. What's going on right now is extremely heavy. I'm like you, Brea, I wake up in like hot, like cold chills and sweats, worried that I'm going to open my phone again the next morning and it's happened again, you know? And it is a heavy space to be in. And it's one of those things that over a period of time leads to depression and anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's something that we have to be mindful about. You know, we cannot pour from an empty cup. And I am huge about that with my patients. I'm huge about it with my friends. My family is probably sick of hearing me say it over and over again, but you know, we have to be mindful of caring for ourselves right now. It is okay to unplug in order to regroup. We can be intentional off of social media. We can be intentional, like you said, not everybody's purpose in place is to be at the march. Some people need to be working on legislation. Some people need to be educating. Some people need to be healing. And I think we have to understand that we need to walk in our purpose and we need to invest in ourselves in order to be able to do that successfully.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ashley. I think that's some very valuable information right now. Because again, I think we all can agree that we feel it. You know, anyone that I talk to, we're talking about how this feels. I mean, because not only are we going through this as Black people, but also, you know, the pandemic, you know, itself, you know, that kind of led us into the civil rights movement part two. I mean, it's a lot. And then being here in Louisville, you and I, the air is so thick, you know, and you just never know what's going to happen. So thank you so much for that. Cordelia, I will mention that as a previous title holder, as I mentioned, in an ambassador of this state and having the platform that I have, I know I felt I'd be remiss if I didn't use my voice to do something, if I didn't use my resources, my network to do something in a city that's really at the epicenter of all of this right now that's going on in our country currently. And so Cordelia, I know you too have ARC, a foundation that you created in DC. And if I can say, I believe you shared with me that what inspired you was your own personal story to create ARC. And so if you could just share a little bit about how using your story, our stories as Black people, as Black women are so complex, but how one can use their own truth, their own story to walk in their purpose and how that can change the lives of young people so that, again, they too can move the needle in whatever way, you know, is unique to them.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brea. Yes, so I founded ARC, Acts of Random Kindness, after aging out of the foster care system and graduating with a bachelor's in social work in 2014. And at that time, I was only one of 6% nationally to age out of the foster care system. And throughout my entire life and my upbringing, I faced adversity after adversity after adversity. And I always wonder what my life would look like if I didn't face those things. But one thing that I was able to take from those experiences was being able to find my purpose and my passion in life. Becoming a social worker, I have been able to have a unique lived experience perspective when I work with the youth in the community because I have been in their shoes. I know what it feels like to go through the things that they are facing, and what helps me stay the course and continue on this path is waking up and being able to do this every day because I love it so much, because I've been there and I was able to overcome it. I didn't just say, I'm going to forget about all those things that I've been through. I said to myself that I want to go back and help those who are facing similar life challenges that I faced myself. And so I wanted to share just a process with everyone as we continue to face adversities. We're always going to face adversities in life, but it's so important for us to stay focused when we do face failures and adversities, because they're always going to come. There's always going to be bumps in the road, and it's so important for us to stay the course. So the first question to ask yourself is, do you have the facts? Use facts to guide you, but use your emotions to fuel you. So right now, everybody's in an uproar. Everybody's feeling so many different emotions. Use that emotion to make sure you're doing something, make sure you're taking that action, and then use the facts as well to help guide you in making those decisions or creating change. Take a very complex issue and simplify it. What we're facing in terms of racism as African Americans and as Black people in the United States is a very, very complex issue. And how can we simplify that in order to achieve things and to build on top of one another in order to create change on a larger scale? So what does that look like for you? As Dr. Anderson mentioned, you can't pour from an empty cup. And then you have different levels of taking action. So some might be out there processing, but some might be creating policy and involved in legislation. So what type of change would you like to be involved in, and what level of change would you like to be involved in, and break that down so that it's more manageable for you. These issues, when they're simple, they're easier to move past and work through instead of trying to tackle the more complex issue. And then ask yourself, is this a problem that I can solve, or is this someone else's problem? And you ask yourself that because you may not be in a position to create that change. And if you know someone who is, that may be the opportunity to have the conversation with them, or for you to convince them that there is an issue if the problem doesn't lie solely on you. So ask yourself, is this an issue that you can actually change, or is there something that you need to do or talk to someone in that arena where they have more power to create change? Another question is what are your strengths? Ask yourself, what strengths do I bring to the table? And those are not just personal strengths, those are also your network, the people around you, your resources. Tap into those strengths and be able to bring those to the table when trying to overcome adversity and create change. Another question to ask yourself is, do I know what the people who are involved, do I know what they're thinking? Don't ignore other people's opinions and assessments of an issue, because those are things that can provide a whole perspective, the bigger picture, and inform you what is going on with the issue at adversity that you are actually trying to face. So take other people's opinions, take them with a grain of salt, but also use them as you create this process of change for yourself. Look back and look at ways that other people have tried to tackle the issue that you're trying to tackle. Learn from their successes, learn from their failures, and apply those so you aren't making those same mistakes, and you're not reinventing the wheel if not necessary. So those are some of the things that I want to share with everyone watching today in terms of a call to action, is ask yourself those questions so that when you are trying to create change and overcome an adversity, all the adversities that we're facing today, it's so important to ask yourself those questions so that you can stay the course and ensure that your implementation is impactful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And I will close it out by saying, again, one, thank you to you all for doing exactly what you're doing. And I think now more than ever, we see how imperative it is to stay focused, Cordelia, like you said, and to really align ourselves with our true purpose and calling that God has over our lives. I think my parents have always told me, like, your life is not yours. You were put here to change the world. You were put here to contribute to your community in some form or fashion. And so I think with the pandemic and everything going on right now as it relates to race, and that's been going on, it's just coming to the light. Again, we see how vital it is to take our lives seriously, to take our gifts seriously, to use them in ways that is not just beneficial to ourselves, but that contributes to the world at large. And so again, I think you all are doing that perfectly. And I also want to just say again, my call to action is, if you are willing to take on the responsibility of having such a platform, of acquiring such a title as Miss Teen USA, as Miss DC USA, and as a director of an entire organization, Miss Kentucky America, if anyone is to acquire such a title, that you realize the responsibility that comes with that. This isn't the time to be self-righteous. This isn't the time to compare ourselves to other people. We all have a unique way to us to, again, contribute to conversation and to change in general. So thank you all. And thank you so much again, Ebony. This has been amazing. And I hope everyone that's tuned in is inspired in some way to grow, lead, and inspire for the greater good of our country. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Ready.
Somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right. We've got some difficult days ahead. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight